Welcome to the online training for supporting functional mobility and safe transfers, also known as client handling. The online version of this training is intended for part-time and overnight staff and is to be followed with an in-person supplementary training. Let's start by reviewing our goals and outcomes for this training. By the end of this training, we will have reoriented or oriented you to the relevant policies and workplace safety legislation. We'll identify common ABI impairments and their connection to functional mobility and safe transfers. We will have discussed relevant posture and body mechanics principles. We will also discuss the RF and CF role in supporting functional mobility and safe transfers, as well as the occupational therapist's role in assessing and supporting functional mobility and safe transfers. We're also going to review and become more comfortable with the following tools to be used in supporting your clients, including the steps for a safe transfer, the 4+1 pre-transfer screen, and the 10-point check. We're also going to identify the relevant information that needs to be gathered after a fall and learn the procedures for getting up from a fall as well as getting up from a fall with hemiparesis. We're going to discuss how to safely store a wheelchair in the trunk of a car, as well as review some community resources. TO, Access Now, and Stopgap. We're going to discuss key characteristics of various mobility devices, including walkers, canes, and wheelchairs, and how to maintain these devices. We'll discuss community scenarios and strategies for supporting your clients with mobility issues in the community. We'll review relevant resources for assistive devices, including the Assistive Device Program and March of Dimes. We'll discuss falls data as it pertains to CHEERS and the purpose of collecting the falls data. And finally, we'll learn about the connection between activity and maintaining functional mobility. At this point, I imagine you might be asking yourself some of the following questions, like why am I taking this again? Or can I just catch someone who falls? So hold on, we're going to get to all of that. In short, client handling training is taken every 2 years to protect you, the CHEERS staff, from injury, and to enable you in your role of supporting CHEERS clients as safely as possible. The training is also required to increase client safety and to adhere to the legislation regarding workplace safety and to comply with CHEERS policies. We also take this training to enable us to be as proactive as we can in preventing injuries and falls before they happen. Now let's move on to policies and legislation. This includes workplace legislation as well as CHEERS internal policies and accreditation requirements. The workplace safety and health legislation mandates that employers provide training and equipment and that employees comply with safe work procedures and safe use of equipment. Due to the potential for injury during client transfer tasks, recertification in client handling must occur every 2 years in order to comply with accreditation standards for job demands that present risks for injury. CHEERS has proactively implemented various internal policies to further protect both clients and staff: the MSD, slips and falls, and handling, all of which fall under a broader general policy of non-weight bearing. What this means is that a CHEERS staff should not be lifting or bearing the weight of any CHEERS client. It is important to be aware of the relevant CHEERS policies as they relate to client handling. These include, but are not limited to, client handling. This policy outlines the safe work practices, responsibilities, and procedures when supporting client transfers, repositioning, and responding to client falls. The management of transfers, repositioning, and falls. This guideline provides support to facilitate client and employee safety and promote independence and consistency of support in transfers, repositioning, and falls management. The Falls Prevention Program. This guideline communicates the CHEERS strategy for preventing client falls and fall-related injuries. Prevention and management of musculoskeletal disorders. This policy is to increase employee awareness and knowledge about musculoskeletal disorders and to provide employees with information regarding safe work practices that are in place to assist in reducing the risk of MSD. These policies clearly outline the requirement that CHEERS employees do not lift or bear the weight of any client. If you are unfamiliar with the above policies, it is important that you take some time to review them. The policies can all be located on SharePoint. In order to comply with the legislation, high-risk tasks such as assisting in client transfers must be identified. Once a high-risk task is identified, controls such as a support procedure can be implemented to reduce the risk of injuries to both clients and staff. CHEERS also has an obligation to provide adequate space to perform such tasks, appropriate training, staff breaks, and staffing rotations. Staff can and should refuse to participate in an unsafe transfer and/or lift. Manual handling of clients should only be provided in emergency or life-threatening situations. If you have any questions in regards to tasks which you are uncertain of whether or not these are safe, please take a moment to pause the video and jot this down so that you can notify your CHEERS supervisor or the CHEERS occupational therapist. Now let's think specifically about the CHEERS population, clients with acquired brain injuries. Take a moment and think about which factors you might consider when it comes to supporting functional mobility and safe transfers, as well as in preventing falls while supporting a client with a brain injury. Let's consider some common physical impairments within the ABI population and how they may impact functional mobility, transfers, and one's risk of falls. Common impairments include impaired balance, mobility issues such as unsteady gait, visual deficits or impairments, poor coordination and/or poor proprioception, impairments in motor planning, sensory deficits, hemiparesis, and impaired range of motion. Next, let's consider some common cognitive impairments within the ABI population. Alterations in executive functioning which may cause impairments in the ability to implement or carry out goal-directed behavior, poor planning, and poor monitoring of behavior. Low motivation and/or difficulty with initiation, poor judgment, impulsivity, impaired attention skills and difficulty with focus, memory impairments, impaired language comprehension and expression skills, and difficulty with flexibility. For example, this means difficulty performing the same task out of sequence or in a different setting. Finally, we must also consider emotional and psychological impairments, which could include depression, anxiety, disinhibition, lack of initiation, mood swings, agitation, and impulsivity. All of the physical, cognitive, and emotional factors can affect a client's functional mobility, safe transfers, and their risk for a fall. These factors should be considered in supporting each individual client. The more we know, the better we can plan to successfully support the client, while keeping the client's right to respect, dignity, and choice in mind. The figure you now see on your screen is the Cheers clinical model. The clinical model provides us with a means of viewing and organizing the clinical process at Cheers, and its elements are present in all the work we do with our Cheers clients. Let's consider how the clinical model relates to supporting functional mobility and safe transfers. The first pillar within the model is client and family-centered service. So, for example, in supporting a client with a bathroom transfer, we would want to consider the client's dignity, privacy, preferences, and autonomy. Next, neurobehavioral principles such as metacognitive routines, cognitive compensation, errorless learning, and brain and behavior relationships also inform the process. For example, in supporting a client with impaired planning, we may choose to implement strategies such as modeling, sequencing, or errorless learning. The concept of applied behavioral analysis can also be used to facilitate a client's initiation through reinforcement. Finally, functional supports may be the most clearly connected to client handling through concepts such as identifying environmental supports and facilitating supported participation. Let's talk transfers. First off, we want to establish a clear understanding of our client handling terms. What exactly are we referring to when we say transfer, lift, and reposition? When we say transfer, specifically at Cheers, this is referring to the procedure used to assist a client who can bear weight at least through one leg or both arms to move from one surface to another. A lift refers to a procedure used to elevate or carry the entire weight of a person or object. Lifts can be manual, so performed by another person, or mechanical, performed by things like a Hoyer lift. At Cheers, we do employ a no-lift policy, so therefore staff should never fully bear the weight of a client. Lift is different from reposition in that a reposition refers to a procedure used to move a client to a new position on the same surface. So repositioning should be done when the client is physically unable to move or unable to follow instructions. You want to note that each client will have their own support procedure if they do require assistance with transfers and repositioning. So you'll want to refer to each client's individual support procedure. When supporting clients with safe transfers, we want to ensure that we're assisting them in setting up properly. The steps that you'll need to take to set a client up for a transfer include positioning the client. So decrease the distance between transfer surfaces as much as possible. If in a wheelchair, remove the footrests. Remove armrests if appropriate. Ensure that brakes are applied. Unfasten the seatbelt. Ensure the client's feet are back and flat on the floor and that they are wearing proper footwear. Have the client scoot forward and/or lean forward. Reach up high if using a floor-to-ceiling pole or push off the armrest. Stand up tall and straight. Pivot, and then slowly sit down. When supporting your client's functional mobility and safe transfers, communication is key. It is of the utmost importance that the client is aware of and understands what he or she is about to do. Use simple and concrete language throughout. Use of phrases such as ready, set, stand, or ready, set, step are less confusing than 1, 2, 3. Use alternate ways to communicate the task if necessary, such as modeling or pictures. Collaborate with the client. Try to elicit the language from the client which can demonstrate an understanding, as well as provide the client with some autonomy and empowerment. When appropriate, use a combination of strategies. It is important that you are aware of and comfortable with your role in supporting functional mobility and safe transfers. When appropriate, your role as an RF or CF is to provide setup support, environmental scanning, supervision, verbal prompting and/or cueing, as well as support with device maintenance. It is important to note that at times you may need to provide light touch cueing to call attention to an area to activate it, but at no time should you be providing any weight-bearing or lifting support. For example, you may need to touch a client's right arm to draw attention to it, facilitating its use during the transfer. The occupational therapist's role in supporting functional mobility and safe transfers is to assess transfers and mobility as needed, determine levels of support required, provide recommendations, and facilitate the acquisition of the assistive and mobility devices. Should you have any concerns regarding a client's transfers or mobility, please talk to your service coordinator or senior and refer to the OT as appropriate. Typically, you may know your client well and you may have an established support procedure for transfers. However, there will be times in which we will need to conduct a pre-transfer screening in order to assess the client's readiness or ability to perform a transfer. In other words, if there is a time in which you suspect your client may not be able to complete their transfer as they normally would, perhaps they have had a recent fall, there is some sort of physical decline, or perhaps you can't quite put your finger on it, but your client seems to be off from their usual baseline. In such cases, the 4+1 pre-transfer screening tool should be used to assist you in determining if it is safe to proceed with a client transfer. The 4+1 pre-transfer screening was developed by UHN and assesses 5 factors, 4 physical and 1 cognitive, to assist you in making your determination for transfer readiness. What this means is that you will have the client perform the following 4 steps prior to initiating a transfer. First, you will look at core or trunk control by having the client sit at the edge of the bed unsupported or sit forward from the back of the chair. Secondly, you'll look at leg extension, which is assessed by having the client extend at least one leg off the bed or straighten one leg from the knee when sitting. Arm strength is then assessed by having the client use their arm to assist with repositioning. Finally, bridging. Bridging is known as having the client lift their pelvis off the bed or weight shift from side to side and front to back in a chair. Throughout the screening, you will be assessing your client's cognition for changes from their baseline. Consider if they have been able to follow your instructions and demonstrate an understanding of what you are telling them. Consider the role of pain, fatigue, confusion, and/or any medication changes. This tool is developed only to assist in determining readiness for a transfer. If in doubt, always err on the side of caution and do not proceed with a transfer if it is not immediately necessary. So what happens if the 4+1 screener does not go well with your client? What you should do in this case is consider the following factors. What you're seeing, was it a change from the client's typical abilities and behavior? Is the client in pain? Are they tired or groggy, And has there been a recent medication change? Importantly, you'll need to consider, is the transfer necessary? If the transfer is not necessary, don't do it and reassess at a later time. Communicate the outcomes and your concerns with your team, the client family, or other stakeholders if you're unsure if there's a significant change. Contact a senior or a service coordinator if in doubt. If you believe there's a medical emergency, do not hesitate to call 911. Moving on to bathroom transfers. When supporting a client with a transfer in the bathroom, you should always consider the risks of the location. Conduct an environmental scan to assess for things such as a wet floor or loose tiles. You will need to consider the risks versus the benefits of transferring in that location versus using a shower commode for transport. Be aware of existing devices and how to use them properly, such as grab bars, bath mats, floor-to-ceiling poles, and commodes. Be aware of common maintenance issues to look out for, such as rust, loose grab bars, and loose tiles. Finally, you will always want to consider balancing the dignity and the safety of the client. For example, preserving autonomy and privacy while reducing the risk of injury or fall. When supporting a client with a car transfer, you should consider the following factors: the height of the vehicle, how to encourage the client to use stable surfaces as much as possible to assist in the transfer, for example, using the armrest on their wheelchair as opposed to the car door, which is not a stable surface. How you will get the assistive device in and out of the car. For example, how to use proper body mechanics and strategies to get the transport wheelchair into the car trunk. How to maximize legroom for your client, and how to help facilitate repositioning if required. When assisting a client with a bed transfer, you will need to consider the following: the height of the bed, and is this an adjustable bed? If it is an adjustable bed, we would like to use this feature to optimize positioning. In other words, let's get the client's hips and knees at an optimal angle for movement and to help get their feet flat on the floor. Can the client assist with sitting and repositioning? Do we need to use a slide sheet to assist with positioning once in bed? Are bed rails available? Can the client use them to assist with repositioning and bridging? Does the client have trouble lifting their leg into bed, and can we explore techniques or assistive devices to enable this? Now we are going to spend some time discussing wheelchair use and how to facilitate safe use for yourself and your clients. One of the most important things you can do to protect yourself and your long-term health is to practice proper body mechanics. This is especially true when it comes to handling wheelchairs. Proper body mechanics include a wide base of support, which means your feet further apart as opposed to closer together, bending at the knees, keeping your back and neck straight or neutral. When pushing a wheelchair, protect yourself by activating your core. Straighten your back, keep the wheelchair close to your body. When bending down, for example, to adjust footrests or put on a brace, protect yourself by coming at the wheelchair from the side, straightening your back, and bending at the knees. Crouch, kneel, or sit on a chair or stool if it's available. Don't forget to inform the client of what you're doing before you start. When pushing clients in wheelchairs on an incline, be it a ramp or a hill, use the following techniques to protect yourself and the client. Ensure the client's seatbelt is fastened. Push in a forward motion when going up an incline and have the client lean slightly forward if able. When going down a hill or a ramp, move in a backwards motion, as depicted in the image on the screen. Keep yourself close to the wheelchair with an activated core, arms close to the body, and a neutral back. Apply a firm grip to the handles and move slowly. When it comes to navigating ramps, some ramps may not be to code or may be unsafe and should be avoided if possible. Per barrier-free building codes in Canada, wheelchair ramps are required to have at maximum 1 inch of rise per 12 inch of run. The lower the slope, the safer and easier the use of the ramp. It may not sound like much, however, even a slight incline can be challenging for someone in a wheelchair, especially if we consider factors such as hemiparesis. If you travel outside with a client, you will no doubt encounter a curb or two without a curb cutout, or with a cutout that you are unable to access for any given reason. In the event you need to assist the client in navigating up a curb in their wheelchair, consider the following techniques. Press your foot on the frame bar of the wheelchair, not the anti-tippers. Push down on the handles and gently tip the wheelchair backwards. Push the wheelchair slightly forward so the front casters are on the curb, and then use the power stance to push the rear wheels up onto the curb. When assisting a client in navigating down a curb, it is safest to proceed backwards, slowly backing the wheelchair off the curb. When navigating grassy or uneven surfaces, plan ahead and avoid when possible. Flip the footrests and anti-tippers up while pushing through grass. Activate your core, stay as close to the chair as possible, and use the power stance. Have the client help as much as they can. It may help you to turn the chair backwards. When supporting a client in the community, you may find that you need to transport their wheelchair in your trunk. In order to do this as safely as possible, you'll want to remove as many parts of the wheelchair as you can. For example, remove the footrests, backrests, the cushion, and any bags. You'll want to place the brakes on the wheels so that they don't spin when you move the wheelchair. Fold the wheelchair into its smallest position. Have a second person assist you wherever possible. Be mindful of your body mechanics, bending at the knees, engaging your core, keeping your back straight, and lifting with your legs. Bring the chair to the edge of the trunk, placing a blanket over the threshold of the trunk. You'll want to slide or tip the wheelchair in and out as much as possible, as opposed to lifting. Now we're going to spend some time discussing posture. It is very important to maintain good posture while eating. Doing so reduces the risk of aspiration of food or fluid into the airways and improves head control, thus increases jaw stability and tongue control. Good posture while eating improves hand-to-mouth coordination and also encourages communication and enjoyment during mealtime. Posture also impacts one's ability to self-propel in a wheelchair. By engaging in proper posture, less energy is required to propel, and there is also a reduced risk of injury. You can help your clients achieve proper posture while sitting in their wheelchair by ensuring that they maintain their knees, hips, and elbows at roughly 90 degrees, by prompting the client to sit back in their wheelchair and sit up tall, Encourage them to activate their core muscles. Ensure the client is centered and back after they've transferred into their wheelchair. And watch out for the slide, which is the slouching down into the wheelchair. Encourage your client to reposition when this occurs. If you think that your client's wheelchair may not be a good fit for your client, please refer to the occupational therapist for further assessment. Now we're going to move on to a discussion in regards to mobility devices, which for many clients are an integral part of achieving functional mobility and reducing their risk of falls. Canes provide a larger base of support, thus offering increased stability when ambulating. Canes are meant to assist with balance, but not to provide weight-bearing support, meaning that they are not meant to be heavily leaned on. Generally, canes are to be held on the stronger side to compensate for the weakness of the opposite side. In terms of height, optimally the handle should align with the crease of the client's wrist when they are standing in their typical posture with arm relaxed at their side. Ideally, the cane should be adjustable to the client's height. There are several different types of canes with different handles and tips. Single point canes have a single support point and are the most common. Multiple point canes, such as quad or tripod canes, have several points that touch the ground and are standalone to provide increased stability. When using a quad cane, all points of the cane should touch the ground with each step. There are also several different handle types offering varying degrees of comfort, weight distribution, and support. Before using a cane, clients should be assessed for appropriateness and fit, as well as taught how to properly use the cane. Walkers provide increased support for those with mobility issues and should be prescribed by either an OT or a PT. Just like with canes, there are various types of walkers offering varying levels of support. A standard walker has 4 rubber-tipped legs, which must be picked up to move. A 2-wheeled walker has 2 wheels in the front and can be helpful for someone who requires some, but not constant weight-bearing support. A 4-wheeled walker is just as it sounds, with 4 wheels. It provides balance support but should not be leaned on. People using this type of walker should be able to control the brakes with ease. Ideally, handle height should align with the crease of the client's wrist when they are standing in their typical posture with an arm relaxed at their side. When a client is transferring from a seated position to standing, prompt the client to push up on the armrest of the chair rather than pulling on the walker. When transferring from standing to seated, have the client sit in a controlled manner, again using the chair to lower themselves instead of pulling on the walker. Many rollator walkers come with a seat. If the client uses the seat, ensure that they have applied the brakes prior to sitting or standing. Do not use the walker to push the client on. They are not meant to be pushed with a client seated and can tip over easily. As with walkers and canes, there are various types of wheelchairs. The majority of wheelchairs must be prescribed and custom fit to the user. Transport wheelchairs do not need to be prescribed, however, are meant to be used only to transport the individual for short distances. Tips for safe wheelchair use include ensuring that the brakes are applied for all transfers, that the anti-tippers are installed and in a downwards position, and that seat belts are on and to be used for positioning, support, and safety. Mobility devices should be checked regularly for maintenance and may require repair or upkeep to ensure optimal safety. When checking a wheelchair for regular maintenance, you may refer to the following 10-point check. Check the brakes for tension and grip. Inspect the rear wheels, make sure the tread is intact, and ensure that the spokes are intact as well. Check the casters, which are the small front wheels. Ensure that they're spinning freely and remove anything such as hair or string that may be stuck in the wheels. Ensure that the anti-tippers are in place and positioned down. Check the footrests to ensure that they swing and lock into place. Check the armrests for stability and make sure that they are intact. Check for wear of the material on the armrests. Inspect the seat cushion to ensure the rigidizer is in place and not broken, and ensure that the cushion cover is intact. Check the back support for tension and the material for wear. You'll want to check the push handles to ensure that they're also intact and stable. Finally, make sure that the seat belt is secure with a functioning locking system. There are available financial resources for assistive devices, with the primary source being the Assistive Devices Program, or ADP. ADP is government-funded subsidy which will cover up to 75% of the cost of various assistive devices. These devices must be prescribed and approved by an ADP authorizer who is often an occupational or physiotherapist. Individuals are eligible for a mobility device every 5 years and new seating and positioning every 2 years. If the user's mobility device is no longer suitable, for example, due to a significant decline in their function or changes in their weight, they may be eligible for a new device before the standard 5 years. There are also other funding sources which can assist with covering the cost of assistive devices, such as ODSP and March of Dimes. Now we are going to spend some time discussing falls. Falls are defined by the World Health Organization as an event which results in a person coming to rest inadvertently on the ground or floor or other lower level. This is important to note, as this means a fall does not have to just be on the ground, but any lower level. For example, falling onto a chair or onto a bed. There are 4 main systems that work together to control balance and prevent falling: visual, vestibular, somatosensory, and musculoskeletal systems. Within this, the balance sensors include the brain, the eyes, inner ear, muscles, joints, and sense of touch. The factors that contribute to a loss of balance are represented by 4 categories. These include biological, such as chronic or acute conditions; behavioral, such as a fear of falling; social or economic, such as limited supports or lack of funding to purchase the needed assistive devices; and environmental factors, such as a slippery floor, ice outside, or lack of grab bars. Let's take a moment now to consider some of the ABI factors that could contribute to an increased risk of falls. These can include physical factors such as poor balance, mobility, a visual impairment, impaired coordination, sensory deficits, hemiparesis, and poor motor planning. Cognitive factors which could contribute to an increased risk of falls include impaired executive functioning, decreased initiation, poor judgment and impulsivity, poor attention, impaired memory, impaired language comprehension and expression, and difficulty with flexibility. Emotional and psychological factors may include depression, anxiety, disinhibition, lack of initiation, mood swings, agitation, and social isolation. It is very important that you do not attempt to catch a falling client. Although your initial reaction may be to catch someone who is falling, There are several reasons why you should not attempt to do so. When you try to catch a client who is falling, you put both yourself and the client at a risk of injury. For example, jarring your back due to abrupt force or interrupting the client's safe landing response, causing injuries such as shoulder subluxation or dislocations. What we can do is focus on prevention by establishing routines, supervision, and ensuring things like proper footwear. We can set up the environment to reduce risks, such as ensuring grab bars in place, placing the wheelchair behind the client during transfers, and applying the brakes. Consider the different types of falls. Does the client have frequent sudden drop falls or slow falls? For example, if the client has sudden falls related to seizures, we will need to take a different approach versus that of a client who has controlled slow falls due to hemiparesis. The safe landing response is the body's natural response to protecting oneself during a fall, which includes bending at the knees and arms, protecting the head, and catching oneself with an arm. The safe landing response is one of the main reasons why we do not want to try and catch a person who is falling, because in doing so we are likely to interrupt their safe landing response. The safe landing response is likely already impaired or delayed in many ABI clients due to their injuries or impairments. Thus, it is important not to further impair this response by interrupting it. In addressing falls and creating strategies and interventions to reduce the frequency and risk of falls, we must consider a multifactorial approach. The Beach model is evidence-based and is the underlying model used at CHEERS in addressing falls assessment, intervention, and prevention. Beach considers numerous factors, including the client's education, equipment, the environment, activity, clothing and footwear, and health management in eliciting the common goal of behavior change, meaning reducing falls. We should note that education does not necessarily mean formal schooling, but education and awareness as it relates to falls prevention. Let's consider a few examples of falls risk factors. You'll see on this slide we have categorized the risks by person factors, environment factors, and task factors. For example, a person factor might be a fear of falling, which we may choose to address by engaging the client in an exercise routine and providing teaching regarding transfer techniques and falls prevention. An environmental factor may include clutter, which we could address by assisting the client to declutter and creating clear pathways, removing or securing rugs, etc. A task factor may be that the task appears to be too complex for the client, which we could address by breaking the task down into its individual steps and creating an individualized support plan for the client. Take a moment to review this slide, which further outlines a few possible interventions as they relate to falls prevention and safe transfers. As an agency, we strive to take a proactive approach and prevent falls before they happen. However, the reality is that falls do happen. Thus, we need to know how to best react to deal with a fall after it happens. If you have a client who has experienced a fall, your first step will be to assess for any injuries and call emergency services as necessary. If in doubt, don't hesitate to call for help. Once you have determined your client is safe to get up, have the client slowly roll onto their side. You'll want to find something sturdy, such as a chair that they can use to hold on to. Have the client push their upper body up, lifting their head slowly and steadying themselves. Have the client rise slowly onto their hands and knees. Next, they will slide 1 foot forward so that it's flat on the floor, using the sturdy surface to steady themselves. Have the client keep their other leg bent with the knee still on the floor. Next, you'll have the client rise slowly onto both feet, finally having the client sit for a few minutes before doing anything else. Getting up from a fall with hemiparesis looks a little bit different. In this case, you'll want to have the client put the unaffected or less affected side to work. For example, they'll be using their unaffected arm to push up into a seated position, push-up style, while laying on the affected arm. Again, you'll want to use a stable object from the environment to push off of, such as a chair or a locked wheelchair. You as staff may need to stabilize the client's affected side, for example, bracing your leg against the client's leg. Provide physical cues in the form of light touch on the areas the client needs to activate or focus on. Provide verbal cues regarding the same. It's important to note that when you're assisting a client in getting up from a fall, before you proceed, in addition to assessing your client for injury, you should also assess their cognition and communication in order to determine if they will be able to follow instruction and safely participate in getting up. Ask yourself, is this client at their baseline? ABI clients may have varied baselines in terms of cognition and communication abilities. This slide illustrates the various means of communication in addition to verbal. Prior to assisting your client with getting up, ensure that they are able to adequately understand the direction you are providing. All client falls must be reported at Cheers. Falls are tracked on GoldCare, and the reports should include the time of the fall, location, the activity that the client was participating in, the type of fall, for example, was it a slip, a trip, a transfer, a slow fall, a seizure, and so on. The footwear that the client was wearing, was it witnessed or unwitnessed? And were they using an assistive device at the time? And if so, were the brakes on? Falls reports are important so that we can identify trends, risks, and causes and intervene as appropriate. The Falls report assists in creating specific and individualized intervention and support plans for clients who are experiencing falls. Moving on, we're going to briefly discuss community access. Accessibility in the community has come a long way over the years, but often still we find ourselves in settings which are in fact inaccessible. There are, however, a few things you can do before going out with clients who require accessible locations. Consider researching new locations or calling ahead. Make alternate plans for washroom access if needed. Plan how to best position yourself in limited spaces. Consider potential CPI concerns. Think about how you will navigate the sinks and access areas. Again, always consider balancing your client needs with safety and dignity, and think about a plan of what you will do in case something goes wrong. There are several resources for finding accessible spaces in the community, including things like Access.to, which provides accessibility reviews, Access Now, which provides a map-based version of accessible locations, and Stopgap, a community group who builds and installs temporary wheelchair ramps at various locations. Finally, we'd like to take a moment to discuss the important role you play as Cheers staff in enabling clients to maintain their current level of functional mobility. Consider the principle of use it or lose it. Did you know that with total inactivity, this can lead to a decrease of 10 to 20% muscle strength per week? Maintaining functional mobility increases opportunities for social interactions, increases circulation and decreases stiffness, decreases time spent in sitting, increases mood, improves quality of life, and importantly, decreases one's risk of falls and injury should they experience a fall. Finally, we'd like to take a moment to discuss the important role you play as Cheers staff in enabling clients to maintain their current level of functional mobility. Thank you for your attention and your participation in the client handling, supporting functional mobility and safe transfers training. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please do not hesitate to contact your Cheers occupational therapist.